touchdowns that are even in the conversation as a week 1 starter. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to like Coleman or the Jets offense or their line, but you have to like the zero risk play here that actually has some solid upside, even if or when Michael Carter takes over at some point. Also, for what it's worth, Coleman has been someone who's missed time due to injuries, but he knows this offensive system, coming over from the 49ers along with Mike LaFleur and Robert Saleh, and has actually been quite effective from a fantasy standpoint when on the field. Outside of 2020, which was mostly a lost season for Coleman, he averaged almost 9 touchdowns per year over his previous 4 campaigns, of which more than a third of them came in the receiving game. Touchdowns are volatile, I get that, and they can be hard to come by in this bad offense. But the point is that Coleman has found ways to produce in the past. And given the circumstances, it really feels like he's the perfect candidate to start the season atop New York's depth chart and slowly give way to Carter as the season goes on. I'm pretty cool with that considering he's totally free. I expect the Texans offense to be bad this year. I'm sure you do too. But I'm never opposed to taking a low-risk shot on their starting running back if everyone is fading them based on the assumption that they won't score points. Yeah, it's true. The Texans probably won't score many touchdowns this year, but neither did the Giants in 2020, who finished dead last in offensive touchdowns with 1.6 per game. But what if I told you Wayne Gallman was the RB6 from week 7 through 14 in the 7 straight weeks he saw double-digit carries? Or that James Robinson was the year's RB7 despite the Jaguars going 1-15? I could run down a huge list of awful offenses that still produced quality running back seasons, but I'll give you one that seems more appropriate. In 2019, only 2 teams averaged fewer offensive touchdowns than the Broncos. A 1,000-yard rusher and a top 20 fantasy running back. You see what I'm saying here? Yeah, the Texans are going to suck. We all know that. But Lindsey appears to be at the top of the depth chart and poised to take the lead role in this backfield. And the reason Houston sucks is why he's being drafted as the RB46 with an ADP of 148. That means there are over a dozen backups being drafted ahead of Lindsey. And sure, David Johnson could be the third down back, which would actually be pretty useful on a team that's playing from behind so often, but he's clearly fallen out of favor in Houston. And it's not out of the question to assume Lindsey becomes the 3-down back sooner than later. He posted back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in Denver before missing 5 games and playing behind Melvin Gordon last year. But Lindsey is a capable runner and pass catcher. We all know football season is the greatest time of year, but drafting season's a very close second. So whether you're drinking and drafting with your boys for your annual home league or preparing for your next high-stakes draft, the top priority remains the same: winning, and more specifically, winning money. And what better way to do that than by drafting?
What's up, everybody? Ben Raza and Matt Gajeski here. We're getting the season started on a little awkward note here, but we are good to go. It is Christmas in August, Matt. We kind of got things started on Thursday, but you know what? This is the official kickoff of the college football season. I couldn't be more excited. I know you're excited. I know chat's excited. How are you, my friend? I know this is a special day for you.
Yeah, man. I feel like a little kid on Christmas morning. The week leading up felt like it was Christmas coming. It's probably one of the biggest days of the year for me. Like this bowl season, the NFL draft, anytime we get these low-level college teams, I'm super excited.
March Madness as well. Come on now.
March Madness is for sure in there.
For sure. All right, let's get into it. We've got 5 games today. It's a 3-game slate and a 2-game slate. We're going to get you everything that you need to know from a DFS standpoint, from a betting standpoint, and everything in between. I do want to say right off the top, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks, which are offering daily prop-based fantasy contests and features a large group of college football props, one of the largest in the entire DFS industry. Get started today with a deposit match of up to $100 with the promo code Awesemo. Later in the show, you and me are actually going to be giving out some of our favorite prize picks. There's some honestly egregious lines over there, some easy ways to boost the bankroll. But the first thing I want to do is honestly say, what's up, chat? Good to see everybody. Hit that like button. Let's get the season started. But before we dive into the games themselves, we talked about this a little on Thursday, but if people didn't join us, I just want to get into the strategies just a little bit. We're coming off a year with COVID where some conferences didn't start, some played early, there was no non-conference. What do you expect now that we have non-conference games, and just your initial thoughts on the college football season?
Yeah, non-conference is going to be great. Give us a little bit of a measuring stick how these teams will, stack up against each other. Last year we had a lot of bowl games where these teams had only played in conference. So that'll be really nice, but I think it'll be relatively smooth sailing. There haven't been, a ton of positive COVID cases to our knowledge, nothing canceled yet. We never know how the season's going to develop, but right now it looks a lot more positive than this time last year.
No doubt about it. The big things, like I said, for people who are a little unfamiliar with college football, you got a super flex. So you can play, and you probably should play, 2 quarterbacks in your DFS lineups. The other thing that you brought up on Thursday that I think is so incredibly important, when your quarterback gets sacked, you lose the rushing yards for that. So if you take minus 50 yards in rushing, you're basically down a full touchdown already. Those are 2 of the big changes from the NFL to college. Is there anything else you want to point out to all the people before we dive into the slate?
I don't think so. Make sure you're still stacking, super important in college football DFS, but those are the main things. You certainly want to be looking at quarterbacks in your super flex. The night slate tonight is a little different, but we'll actually talk about the night slate today, and we'll tell you why it's just like a weird situation. And otherwise, definitely consider rushing upside for all your quarterbacks. Like you mentioned, even if you're not a dual threat quarterback, you still need to be considering the downside of the negative rushing yards that come from sacks.
No doubt. And like I said, in the NFL, you don't see teams 30-point underdog. In college, you get that every week. So some of these teams, they have no hope, and their offense is really going to struggle. And we've got some of those right off the bat. Let's just get into it. Honestly, we've got plenty of time to break this down. We've got everything that you need. I'm going to say it right off the bat here. Week 0 here at Awesemo, everything is free. So the ownership projections, your usage, your key metrics, all of that stuff, go and check it out. There's literally no reason not to do it. It's completely free this week. You want to jump on that while you still can. But here we go. The first game, probably the biggest of the day. Big Ten, Illinois at home against Nebraska. It's hovering around 6.5. I've seen it tick back to 7. I know you got this game at +8, so obviously you're on Illinois. I also think that it's more of a toss-up game than a game where Nebraska should be favored by a full touchdown. Over-under is pretty pedestrian, 53.5. That's not great. Let's start with Nebraska on the road here. They really are going to need this win for Scott Frost and co. Adrian Martinez is one of the quarterbacks that is mobile. You've alluded to that having some upside. So let's start with him. Who can he throw to? Because they've lost a lot on the outside. And what do you just make of Nebraska as a whole?
I like Nebraska for DFS purposes. Their implied team total is still around 30, which is pretty high in the context of this slate. We have just 2 monstrous team totals and then some middling teams from there on out. So Nebraska, I think people will naturally get to a little bit of. And we can talk about this slate by slate, or excuse me, each platform by each platform, because I think Adrian Martinez is pretty affordable on FanDuel, and then DraftKings, he is affordable, but I think there's other plays just because the salary is so weird over there. They have so many value plays. I don't think you necessarily need to get to Adrian Martinez, but on FanDuel, the pricing is actually a lot sharper. So Adrian Martinez pops a little bit more for me over there, but you like him because of the dual threat ability. He hasn't shown a ton as a passer. He completed 71% of his passes last year, but his yards per attempt was really low, throwing a lot of underneath stuff to Wan'Dale Robinson, who's now transferred. So I think you can use Adrian Martinez on DraftKings. I like him a lot in tournaments. As far as the receivers he's throwing to, you're looking at a completely revamped unit. Again, they lost Wan'Dale, which is a huge loss for them. So you're going into the season with Oliver Martin, Samori Toure, and Omar Manning as your starting 3 receivers. Toure is a former FCS All-American, played at Montana. Martin's also a transfer. And Omar Manning, he comes from the JUCO ranks. He was on the team last year, but he battled injury through most of the year, only appeared in 1 game, didn't have any stats. And the reports that are coming out of Nebraska suggest that Omar Manning could split time with Xavier Betts, which I think makes sense. Betts was another huge recruit. He's a former 4-star. He was the number 20 receiver in that class. So I think they're going to use 4 wide receivers with a preference towards Oliver Martin and Samori Toure.
Yeah, so one of the other things we didn't really point out at the top, you don't need to, and you probably never will play a tight end, barring some weird situations. So like even Nebraska, I assume you think their tight end is unplayable.
Yeah, it's Austin Allen. He's 3,800. Yeah. There's just DraftKings really messed up pricing. There's min price receivers that are starting today, so there's no need to get to a tight end.
So one of the early questions on the stream and what we've been seeing in our premium Slack chat is what is the situation in this Cornhusker backfield? And the first question I want to ask you, what Marquise Stepp, the transfer, is he available? And if he is, where does he fit in?
Yeah, he's available. He has not been practicing most of training camp, but he had foot surgery this offseason, pretty severe. And he just hasn't been available most of camp. So that's allowed 2 freshmen. And Nebraska recruits really well. So these aren't like 3-star recruits. We're talking pretty good recruits at Nebraska. Their names are Gabe Ervin and Sevion Morrison. And it's really interesting to look at those 2 guys. Gabe Ervin is like a fantastic pass catcher. He is good in pass protection. He's only 4,100. And then you have a guy in Sevion Morrison who is expected to play more of a complementary role. He's a guy that, has struggled in pass protection at times during camp. But I think this is going to be a 3-way committee. The most attractive one to me is Morrison because of the price at $3K. I think you'll see mostly Ervin and Morrison with Marquise Stepp ease back into action as he recovers from that injury. But Morrison is the guy I like just because of price there. Min price, you're getting a guy that might see upwards of like 10 to 12 touches.
Yeah, again, the salary relief, it really allows you to do a ton of other things with your lineup. Everybody seems to be on Illinois, and I get it. Nebraska is favorite in the game. It just seems that it could be very, very methodical. On the other side of the game, this is not a great offense with Illinois. They get your boy Bielema taking over. I think they're going to be a pretty solid team, but they're just not a high-paced team. They don't really do anything. What do you see of them? They seem, looking at our ownership, to not be getting any love across the board.
Their team total is super low, 24.5. In the context of this slate, it's not much better than UConn. It's 1 score better than UConn's.
Yeah, that's not good.
And you're saving a lot of salary if you go down to UConn. UConn has the better total overall in the game, better pace environment. This is going to be a slugfest between Nebraska and Illinois, 2 teams that really like to run the ball. You mentioned the coaching change for Illinois, so they're going to Brett Bielema, but they're also going to Tony Peterson at offensive coordinator. He previously coached at App State. He was their OC. They scored a lot of points, but their plays per game was pretty slow. Pass rate, obviously really low in an App State offense. That's more of like a power run scheme. Illinois is built for that. They have a lot of returning production on the offensive line. They only lose Kendrick Green to the NFL. A lot of their dudes were hurt last year up front, and they still were in the top 50 with pass blocking, which is nice. Also a really good run blocking unit. And then they have 5 backs that might see work, running backs, that is. So Chase Brown's their returner. After a breakout season, he had 540 yards on 104 attempts. Also caught 7 passes. So he's kind of a do-it-all back. Then they had transfer Chase Hayden come in. He's a dude that Brett Bielema initially recruited at Arkansas, transfers to East Carolina, doesn't see the field much, transfers to Illinois. So now he's reunited with Bielema. Not to mention they have returners Reggie Love, Jakari Norwood, and Mike Epstein, who have all been productive at various points in time for Illinois. So I think at the best, you're looking at a 2-way committee between Chase Brown and Chase Hayden. At the worst, you could see 5 backs rotated in here for a team that's implied for just 24 points. It's not a great situation to target these runners outside of tournaments. But again, if Illinois gets up in the game, there is big upside because we know they want to run the ball.
Yeah, that's a game flow situation. I don't really see that. I think the game will be competitive, as we talked about. But I think it's more because of the defense. Illinois returns a lot there, and they were ravaged by COVID last year, particularly under center with Peters and whatnot. He is back. I want to ask you about him real quick, because when you look at the ownership, you've got some of the quarterbacks, 4 of them really pushing it. And then there's 2, rightfully so, that have basically no interest. The UConn quarterback and Peters for Illinois. Do you see in tournaments any merit to doing that, or do you say that's not the right leverage? That's just an unnecessary risk?
I would say outside of the biggest tournaments, it's probably not something I'm going to get to. And last year he did play poorly. We didn't see him in a huge sample. He only threw 80 passes, so really small sample. He only completed 49% of them, which is below his career average, which is just north of 50%. So we're not talking about a prolific passer anyway. But if there's one thing you can kind of hang your hat on, he does have a little bit of rushing production. He's not like a premier dual threat, but when he takes sacks, it's usually offset by a scramble. So he's not a 0 on the ground. My worry is Illinois wants to run the ball. How much does he actually receive? And we have some elite quarterbacks on this slate. I don't think he has enough mobility where we want to take a look at him outside of the biggest tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's pretty thin, to be honest. Let's talk about his skill position players just for a bit, and we can wrap this game up and we'll keep it moving. You've got Isaiah Williams on the outside, former quarterback. Not much else to really talk about, though. Hightower, I mean, Daniel Barker, what do you see? Is there a pecking order for these target share, or is it just the team, as you say, they want to run the ball, so these guys are afterthoughts?
We know they want to run the ball. If they get down, they're going to have to throw a little bit. I think Brian Hightower is the leader among their receivers, and it's funny because he only caught 11 passes last year. They lost Josh Amaterbaby, who was their leading receiver last year, and then they moved Isaiah Williams from quarterback to receiver. I think they'll use him in more of a gadget role because he has really good rushing upside. That's where most of his production came when he was under center. But he's a guy that they're going to move in and out of the slot, so he should get some gimme targets. I think he's a pretty good play on both sides. If you're like looking for a run back in an Adrian Martinez stack, I actually like Isaiah Williams a lot in that situation. He's just not in a ton of my builds because Illinois' implied team total is so low. In the GPP lineups where I have Isaiah Williams, there's usually Adrian Martinez or one of the Nebraska backs, and he's a run back.
Yeah, I mean, this game is going to be the lowest of the stacks. The over-under is 10 points, 11 points south of the other two. I also want to say, first one of the year, Anthony Davis, super chat. We really appreciate that. Big fan of you. We won't forget about FanDuel. We will try to sprinkle that in. I know we talk about DraftKings pricing a lot. We'll make sure if there's any pricing over there, we'll get those targets to you.
Williams is really good price on FanDuel.
There you go. Look at that. Isaiah Williams, put him in that lineup.
He's a better value on FanDuel than DraftKings.
But the pricing's more efficient over there, right?
FanDuel has efficient pricing. DraftKings does not.
Shocking. All right.
It is kind of shocking to me. Usually it's the other way around.
It is usually the other way around, but it's never both of them with efficient pricing. Final thoughts on this game. From a betting standpoint, like I said, I'm passing on the total. I lean Illinois like everyone else. Definitely get it 7 or better, though. I would not take Illinois plus 6.5. I think that's a mistake. I'd rather plus 220 on the money line.
Yeah, where I'm at with this game, I have a decent amount of Martinez in tournaments. He's usually stacked with one receiver because he gets it done on the ground. My two favorites are Martin and Torrey. Again, there's a chance that Omar Manning splits time with Xavier Betts today, so I don't have quite as much of them. And then in the run game, Sevian Morrison's my favorite play because of price. I see that being a pretty even committee across the board.
That's going to be, I think, one of the keys to this slate. Morrison, if he performs, if he has double-digit touches at flat min, that is huge salary relief and a spot that you can definitely take advantage of. If he doesn't play, if he doesn't see the field somehow, obviously that could change the dynamic of the entire slate. But all right, let's move to the second game here. And I will say, if we have some time, we'll circle back. We'll see where we're at. We got UConn on the slate, of course. Hasn't played football in over a year. 27.5-point dogs going to Fresno State. It's supposed to be like 95 degrees there. It's going to be ugly, but from a DFS standpoint, there's a lot to talk about here. A very, very healthy total in this game of 63. Let's get the Huskies out of the way because on our shows and Betting You, which is our exclusive podcast, you should be listening to that. You were giving, and I know you'll try to deny this now that we got a lot of people watching, you were giving UConn's offense a little love. You thought they might be able to move the ball just a touch. So I want you to expand on that. What do we see with this team? They're absolutely atrocious. Is there anything to like?
All right. So yeah, UConn is horrific on defense. They're not that bad on offense. I mean, they're pretty bad, but they still scored 17 points in 8 of 12 games against relatively decent competition in 2019. Like, they did play Illinois. They scored 23 points in that game. They played Houston. They scored 17 there. So they did put up points in some spots. They were over 20 points in 6 games. Now, their defense is so bad that they're just getting absolutely crushed. A lot of these points are coming in garbage time. But if UConn can put up like 17 points and you get some of these players at minimum price, I think they're somewhat attractive, mostly in GPPs. And that also comes because you have a Fresno State defense, which is pretty poor. They're bad against the pass. That's certainly their weakness on defense. And UConn's a team that's going to try to throw the ball a ton. Their pass rate's over 50%. They're pretty up-tempo. The problem with their plays per game and why it's so low is they just can't sustain drives. So I think this sets up where you have UConn score some points. Whether that's enough for DFS lineups, I think it's better left to GPPs.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Now, if they do score, you mentioned Fresno State can be exposed a little through the air, and naturally, not a hot take, UConn's going to be trailing in the game. Is it Cameron Ross, 4,800 on DraftKings, north of 7 over on FanDuel? Is there another guy on the outside for UConn? I mean, I can't really see them running the ball too much, and their quarterback not super dynamic, and that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, he doesn't have a long leash. There's a chance that they try to platoon quarterbacks in this game. So Zergiadis is the guy I expect to start. I don't think he's a strong play. I would not be looking to him outside of just crazy contrarian lineups in these big tournaments. Otherwise, I think Cameron Ross is an attractive play at 4,800 on DraftKings. He's middling in my opinion, just because I don't know how many points this team scores. Again, I think they score a little bit, but is it enough for Cameron Ross to overcome some of the better options we have in, on the Fresno side? We haven't talked about them yet. In the last game, UCLA, Hawaii, I think there's some opportunity cost here, but you look at him, he did have some pretty serious production in 2019, 60 catches, 723 yards. He went over 85 yards in 4 of those games. They came against East Carolina, UMass, Central Florida, and Illinois. So, I mean, I don't think he's a guy that is just going to rack up PPR catches outside of maybe screen passes, but they have to score points if he's going to win your tournament lineups. He would be a better cash play, in my opinion, than GPP tournaments, unless you stack the game.
Yeah, it's just, I don't even know. Obviously, a ton of people, and rightfully so, are going to load up on the Fresno stack. Do you think it's okay to just run it alone, or do you want to run back from UConn, wanting them to put up even teens in terms of points?
There are certain lineups I have where I have a game stack of this game, but it's never more than one UConn player in the lineup. So Matt Drayton got hurt. He was their second leading receiver, returner that is, and he's out for the year with a knee injury. So they listed on their starting depth chart Heron Mariso as the starter. He's 3,100. He caught 10 passes for 113 yards in 2019. So he's somebody you could look to near the minimum price for a couple just really cheap targets. But again, in tournaments, what's the upside here? He's very unlikely to score a touchdown. So I think you still would probably want to take a shot on the second or third receiver on Hawaii, UCLA, or Fresno. But he's there, and if you need him in cash or something, I wouldn't recommend it, but really cheap PPR production. Outside of that, they have kind of a battle for their third starter. Kevin Clarius, Keelan Marion, Cameron Harrison, Elijah Jeffries are all candidates to see the field for UConn. It's just not a team I really love.
What about the backfield? Mensa's getting a little love, but again, this is a team clearly they're not going to be running the ball late in the game, and even they're not going to have success on the ground at any point. Mensa's 4,200, 76 over on FanDuel. Anything there, or is that just a pass?
I think he's going to split time a little more than he has in the past. And this speaks to UConn being able to move the ball a little bit for as bad as they are. Mensa had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with UConn, which is pretty impressive. But now they add in a transfer from Miami and Robert Burns. He's a former 4-star. I think we'll see him a little bit. But the guy that the coaching staff's really excited about is Nathan Carter. Super cheap on both platforms. On DraftKings, he's 3,200. They compared him to Donald Brown, and I'm not going to take anything away from that other than the fact that the coaching staff likes him, and they probably try to get him on the field pretty early on. So he's 3,200. If you're punting running back on the main slate, I would prefer to use Sevy and Morrison. But if you're running that 2-game afternoon slate, I think Nathan Carter is viable there.
So this was a game that I don't know if you have a bet on it yet or going to bet it. I had no real feel. The more I look, though, I'm going to have to tell you, I think I may lay the 4 touchdowns, a little inside at 27.5. I just can't get over how bad UConn is. I went back since 2018. They've played 12 road games. They've lost 10 of those by 30 or more points. And I just don't know if I see that changing today. I don't mind hitting Fresno's team total, which is massive. I believe it's 45. And the reason why is because they have actual players on that offense. And let's talk about them. They're going to be the premier stack. They're the spend up options. They love to throw the ball. They have everything that you want. Ronnie Rivers is an absolute stud in the backfield. What's not to like about this team, and how much Fresno is too much Fresno?
I don't know if there's a real answer to that.
Yeah.
There's just so many reasons to like this team. Highest implied team total on the board. Hainer is a solid QB. He doesn't really give you anything as a rusher, but Fresno is a really pass-heavy offense. If you look at just how they play, you're going to see up tempo. They were 5th in the game, or 5th in the country in plays per game last year. They were 14th in pass rate. They threw the ball over 55% of the time. Now they probably lean on the run a little more here than we've seen. But again, you're just looking at a team that's already the kind of offense we want to target. And now they just get a cupcake matchup. So Hainer, for you FanDuel people, Hainer's the second most expensive quarterback. He's cheaper than DTR. He's a really good play on FanDuel. And I still think he's appropriately priced on DraftKings. He projects pretty easily north of 300 yards. So unless he gets benched or something, he should hit the bonus. Pass catchers at every price range to stack him with. There's just so many things to like about this Fresno State offense today.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That is nice because a lot of people, and I think this is the move, going to pair Haener up with a couple of pass catchers, and you've got Jalen Cropper, who's the spend-up option, but he should absolutely torch the secondary. Then you've got, I don't know, a bunch of spend-down options, not super cheap, but a lot of guys vying for that, Josh Kelly and Wheatfall, Pope. Do you have a preference? Because obviously I would assume if you have the money, you would suggest going to get the premier pass catcher.
Yeah, I think Cropper is a great play. On DraftKings, I think he's a little more affordable. He's pretty expensive on FanDuel, but I still think you can get to him just because there's some other cheap options over there. But this is a guy that had nearly 25% target share last year. He averaged 9.7 targets per game. Over his last 4 games, that was up to 12 targets per game. So Cropper is the alpha receiver for this offense. But I think even if you want to avoid him in some of your tournament lineups, there's really easy ways to do that. Josh Kelly is a clear starter for this team. He had an 18% target share last year, averaged 7.2 targets per game. That jumped to 9 targets per game over their last 4 down the stretch. So he's a guy that really emerged as Fresno State continued to play. And he's very cheap on both platforms. DraftKings in particular, he's 4,400. So this is a dude that could see, like his final 3 games last year, 8 targets, 9 targets, 13 targets to close the year. That's just a ton of production you could potentially get for 4,400.
Even though this team is, like I said, they're on the fringe of really laying the wood to UConn, do you worry about guys sitting on the bench late in this game, or is 4 touchdowns amateur hour considering there are spreads that are upwards of, if Clemson was playing, it'd be minus 50 in a slate like this?
For sure. I think there's 2 ways to look at it, and they're both reasons to point to, like not being scared off this game. One, if UConn keeps it close, you just get more time on the field for these players. And then if Fresno State really lays the wood to UConn in the first half, you probably see like 5 or 6 touchdowns scored. And I highly doubt that all goes to one player. If it does, hopefully they're in your lineup. But if it's spread out, that's going to be positive too for loading up on this Fresno team. There's just not a lot of situations where I see their starters getting benched and these players had a good fantasy outing. Or like they didn't have a good fantasy outing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it would have to get out of hand, and every point that UConn can score will prolong that. Like if UConn puts up 14, these guys are getting there. There's no doubt. I just worry that UConn puts up the old 0 points, and then it could get a little thin. But you gotta have exposure to this offense. We're going to talk about Rivers when we get to PrizePicks as well. I do have a couple of announcements. One is a very, very, very good promo. I've mentioned this before on the golf shows, but I'm going to say it here. If you are going to be playing in addition to college football, NFL, and you're sticking around, we're still offering the 15% off annual pass with the promo code BLITZ. So you're going to get the full season's worth, Awesemo Plus player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, premium Slack, everything that we have. You're also going to get the preseason for the slight remainder. I know it's ending, but the Blitz thing, 15% off, Awesemo Plus NFL annual. There's no reason not to do that. I know a lot of you guys are super pumped for the NFL. That's a great way to take advantage of it. So we still have that running. Also, different note, appreciate chat dropping this. It looks like, and it looks like it's a beat writer from the Illini, that Brian Hightower is not dressed for this game for Illinois. Does that change a ton for you in the receiving core?
I think it makes Isaiah Williams a slightly better play than he already was. And I think Isaiah Williams was already the best price-adjusted play. I think he's now pretty clearly the best play. I just don't think Illinois scores a ton of points. So, like, Isaiah Williams is the highest exposed receiver I have on this Illinois team. I only actually have 2 guys that I'm playing from Illinois in the receiving core, and Hightower wasn't one of them. It was because of price. Williams won because he's probably going to get a few carries using gadget plays in and out of the slot, and they're just going to try to get him the ball. Casey Washington was the other one. He's 3,200, and I think now he probably sees a slight uptick in targets from Brian Hightower being out. So you could look to Casey Washington as somebody too. The third receiver they put on the field is probably now going to be split between Donnie Navarro, who's typically a slot receiver. So when Navarro's on the field, they probably move Isaiah Williams outside. When Navarro's off the field, Jafar Armstrong, the former Notre Dame running back, has been converted to receiver for Illinois. He's still a little raw. He was listed as a backup on most of the depth chart projections that I saw, but he probably gets in the field a little more now too. Illinois is starting to get really thin at receiver.
You're as bad as me. I work UMass into every show. You have to work Notre Dame into every single slate. We're going to see if we can do that all year. I'm going to get a UMass. You'll get a Notre Dame. All right, let's get to this third game on this early slate. We got Hawaii. We got UCLA. Everyone is saying that UCLA is going to be much, much better. This is the year. They lost, a bunch of games last year by like a combined 2 touchdowns. Chip Kelly, the clock is ticking. They got to win this game. 17.5-point favorite at home, 67.5-point total. Very, very healthy. Let's start with Hawaii. Obviously, they're on the mainland here, which is not great, but they do have some things to like. They have a dual threat quarterback. They've got some guys that can catch the ball. I don't know if they can stop UCLA, but at the same time, when we're talking about DFS, I do think this is a team that could make some noise today.
Yeah, Hawaii's got a great dual threat quarterback. He's a veteran. Chavon Cordero, a guy we really like for his rushing upside. They're vacating a ton of production in the pass game, and they lost their coach last year, so they move forward now with Todd Graham. He didn't change the offense a ton, which I think is positive. They were still 41st in plays per game. Pass rate was north of 51%, so it's still kind of the Hawaii of old. It's not quite the run and shoot offense. They now have a weird running back / receiver position where you're seeing Calvin Turner play a lot there, but Cordero's going to be fine. He completed 62% of his passes. Very good rushing upside again. The 4th highest implied team total does belong to Hawaii. So I think they're a team you can look at. But just for your reference, they're not implied for that much more than a team like Illinois. So I don't have a ton of them. When I am playing Hawaii players, it is in tournament stacks with UCLA on the other side. And just in the receiving core, it's super unsettled. So they lost Rico Bussey and Melquise Stovall, 2 of their top pass catchers last year. Jared Smart is the top returner they have. He did catch 36 passes. He's basically just a slot receiver. 95% of his snaps were played in the slot, which is positive for fantasy production, gives you really easy opportunities to just catch the ball short, create yards after catch. And from there, the only other clear starter at receiver was Nick Mardner. He caught 11 passes for nearly 200 yards last year, but we just don't know what to really make of Mardner. And then their depth chart was super weird. So they listed a starting running back, and then they listed a running back / receiver position. That went to Calvin Turner. And last year, Turner, he carried the ball 60 times, very efficient as a rusher, but he caught 33 passes as well. And I looked at where his snaps came from. 54% of them were in the slot, 19% were in the backfield. So this is a guy they use mainly at receiver. I think he's kind of the de facto third option there as a pass catcher. He's a little bit expensive, so I'd rather get to the cheaper guys. But Hawaii always rotates receivers too. So you're going to see Zion Bowens, Jalen Walthall, Aaron Cephas, True Edwards. There's a lot of guys that are going to get on the field for Hawaii today.
Turner's the interesting one. I like him, I think, a little more than you do, particularly in tournaments, only because I don't know what they're going to do with him per se. You mentioned that. I think in cash, probably a little thin, and he is pricey. I wish he was a little more reasonable. This is an interesting team. I'm a fan of this quarterback. As you mentioned, he's got experience. He can move. I don't know exactly what he can do, though. UCLA, credit to them. They've got a ton back on defense. They've got a strong secondary. They know what they're doing. I think this team could be very, very good. I know everyone is ready for the LSU game next week. Well, they got to handle business here first. On the other side, listen, DTR, it's time for him and this entire Bruins offense to get it done. Thompson Robinson is mobile. He's got every weapon that you could ask for. He's got transfers in the backfield. I like this team. Where do you see your priorities going with the UCLA squad that's expected to score a lot today?
BTR is a great option. I think he's a little better on DraftKings. He's the second most expensive quarterback there. He is the most expensive on FanDuel. I still think you can play him on FanDuel, but a little bit better on DraftKings. Good rushing upside, which is fantastic. This is a team that likes to run the ball, but because they're implied for so many points, especially in low-risk contest cash lineups, I'm okay with playing DTR and a rusher here. Their implied team total is north of 40. So I think you can, similar approach that we're doing with Fresno State, you can just capture so much of the production by playing multiple skill position players for this team. And that means DTR. And you can stack him. They have affordable options everywhere. There's the expensive options at the top in Phillips and Dulcich. I think both are good plays. I mean, like Phillips last year, his target share was 30%. Now, UCLA is not the pass heaviest team, so he only averaged 8.1 targets per game. And like comparing that to the other side where you have like Josh Kelly on Fresno State, who had an 18% target share, he averaged 7.2 targets per game. So target share is not the end all be all for these players. I think, rather pay down for like Dulcich, who's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. Interestingly, he's more expensive on FanDuel. Those are your top two guys. But from there, you have Chase Cota slated to start. He's 4,600. And the player I'm really interested in is Cam Brown. So he's a Texas A&M transfer, really cheap at 3,400. I think a lot of people were expecting DeLon Hurt to start, but he got himself into some trouble. He is suspended, so Cam Brown is in line to start this game. He's not a player that ever really had a ton of production at A&M, and he's more of just a pure price play on this slate. But again, you're talking about a 3,400 receiver slated to start, playing for a team implied for over 40 points.
Yeah, this is a team that clearly, and when you look at, I'm right now, I'm on your data sheets, which again, I just want to reiterate, these are completely free today. The ownership, the projections, the player usage sheets, where you can see all the attempts, all the targets, all the information that you're getting. It's all completely free today. So go to awesemo.com and check that out. This team does seem to have some production kind of up for grabs. DTR is going to be the driving force with this offense. But as you mentioned, I think the receivers, outside Phillips are somewhat, I don't want to say interchangeable, but there's an opportunity there. Cam Brown, interesting name. Definitely see that as well. Talk to me about the backfield. Britton Brown, Zach Charbonnet from Michigan is here. One of our old friends from last year. How do you see that going? Is this Brown's backfield? Is this a timeshare? And then do you worry about DTR being, he's a mobile quarterback. How much does he cannibalize that production?
Oh, DTR, he didn't take a ton. Give me 1 second. I'll pull up the figures here. So just raw carries go. DTR handled 16% of the carries last year. For reference, Britton Brown handled 26.5, and then they vacated a lot from Demetric Felton. So they have all Demetric Felton's touches available. DTR, 306 rushing yards last year compared to Britton Brown. Brown had 543. So you are going to have Thompson taking a decent amount of these. The thing is, a lot of them came from scrambles. First of all, like he had 18 scrambles last year. But in the game, if you see UCLA actually win this by the spread that they're supposed to win, so 17.5 points, you're not going to see DTR running a lot in the second half. Those designed runs are going to come away just to preserve their quarterback. There's no need to run him when you are, again, up by nearly 3 scores. So I think you will see a lot of the Britton Brown, Zach Charbonnet show, and they are expected to form a 1-2 punch. Their coach tried to compare this to the situation last year where it was 1A, Demetric Felton, 1B, Britton Brown. But again, Demetric Felton was a very special player as a pass catcher. He's a former receiver. Brown and Charbonnet don't have that skill set. I do think they both are going to be out there and a factor in the pass game, a factor in the run game. But I think it's basically going to be a 50-50 split, maybe with a slight edge towards Britton Brown. The pricing on both of these sites is really interesting. They're basically the same price on DraftKings. There's a 300-point edge in Britton Brown's salary. He's a little bit more expensive. And then on FanDuel, Brown is $2K more expensive. So on DraftKings, I would rather get to Brown. On FanDuel, I would rather get to Charbonnet. But I think this is a very good spot to target. I do have some rosters where I have both backs in the lineups. Again, it's a 3-game slate. Those are tournaments specifically. But I do think that's viable. And Charbonnet has really good explosion. This is a dude that averaged 6.5 yards per carry last year. So he just was in a really crowded Michigan offense. They have good running backs over there. So I don't think there's anything we can really take away from him having to transfer. Brown was a transfer himself, but expecting basically 50-50 from these two guys.
Interesting. I know you mentioned those are tournaments. I assume, just for clarity, you do not have DTR in those lineups.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. They just run it down their throat. Last question on this game I want to ask you, more philosophical. Do you factor in anything? Sometimes people say huge game on deck. UCLA doesn't want to put anything on film. They just want to get out of here with a comfortable win. Do you see any merit to that and possibly them kind of easing back DTR if the game is in hand?
No, Chip Kelly went 3-4 last year. He's going to lose his job if he treats games like that.
Correct. This is the make or break. Scott, that's what this slate is really all about. There's a lot of coaches today that really need to get off on a solid start, and certainly Chip Kelly is one of them. From a betting standpoint, real quick, I have zero interest in this game. Spread feels about right. I would lean under on the total, but just slightly. I'm not going to end up betting this.
Yeah, I'm not going to bet this one either.
All right. We've done the 3 games, and if there's any time we could circle back as well. I do want to ask you, though, because our friends at PrizePicks, there's opportunities there kind of in that market when you're looking at the players, whether it's props, whether it's over-unders. I know one for me that I did when I looked over there, Ronnie Rivers, 1 rushing touchdown. I think he's going to get that with ease. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns against UConn. We've already talked about that. So when you look at this lobby and you've got so many opportunities, Ronnie Rivers over 1 rushing touchdown for me is one I really like. Is there something else that you see that you're really drawn to or a player that you would like to target over there?
Yeah, I think Brandon Peters under 182 passing yards is a pretty solid one. For me, he projects around 150 yards, and this is twofold. We can actually call it threefold. One, he's not the most efficient passer himself. He's certainly the best option they have, but that's not saying much. 2, Nebraska has a fairly strong secondary. It's the strength of their defense, in my opinion. And 3rd, Illinois wants to run the ball. So if they get up in this game, I know they're projected to lose this game by 7 points per bookmakers. If Illinois can actually implement the game plan they want, I think they take the air out of the ball and lean on the run game here, taking, I guess, pass attempts away from Brandon Peters.
Yeah, I like that one too. I think there's a lot of ways where he has a pedestrian line today, which is why he's kind of an afterthought on the DFS side. So once again, PrizePicks throughout the year, we're going to be talking about them. Get over there, deposit match up to $100 with that promo code Awesemo. All right, we've talked about these 3 games, but there is the nightcap. You get a 6-hour break. You can unwind. It's the Travers at Saratoga, best horse racing day of the year. So that's why you want to be in Slack. I'm going to get mega degenerate today with the ponies. But after we do that, there are 2 more games. We've got some real barn burners, UTEP and New Mexico State, the game that I've been waiting for, sadly, for months. My favorite bet of the day, and I'll get to that in just a second. This is a game against 2. New Mexico State is awful. They played in the spring. You can elaborate on that. They are around a 10-point underdog at home, total of 59. Oh boy, what do you make of this New Mexico State squad and this game as a whole?
Yeah, New Mexico State's not very good. And
Awful.
You and I have talked about this a lot. They lost a game to Tarleton State. They beat Dixie State by a touchdown. New Mexico State just has a ton of problems. And you get UTEP, a team that went 3-5 last year. They're sort of revamped. Their coaching staff's a little different. They retained their head coach, but they replaced their OC. So I think their offense will look different. But ultimately, you're just dealing with huge talent discrepancies between these 2 teams. So especially in the betting markets, I know you and I have been on this for a long time now. I will be taking UTEP in the game. And from a DFS perspective, the night slate, I think we should talk contextually about this. It's a weird one to play. So you have a huge favorite in UTEP. They don't have like a phenomenal signal caller in Gavin Hardison. And the other teams, the signal callers are like really hard to get to. Jonah Johnson was benched for New Mexico State in the spring season. I just wanted to call it FCS season. He was benched there.
Well,
so he doesn't have a long leash. You look to Southern Utah, like Justin Miller is extremely overmatched against San Jose State's defense. He doesn't have any rushing upside, so I don't think you want to play him. And then the best team to target in the state, San Jose State, they run a quarterback platoon. So like I think Starkel's probably the best quarterback, but maybe Hardison is the best quarterback play, the most secure quarterback play just sheerly by default. And he's super cheap on DraftKings. So I don't love Hardison. He's like very, very mediocre at quarterback, but there's just not a lot of other options. So I think I'm going to get to him out of just necessity.
Is it a situation, because again, 2 game slates, crazy stuff happens, no doubt. Are you still going to try to get a quarterback in your super flex? Because the way you're talking by default, that's going to have to be UTEP and one of the San Jose State quarterbacks, basically.
I'm not going to be forcing a quarterback into my super flex tonight.
Okay.
There will be lineups. I haven't built lineups yet. I would guess it's like 50-50.
No, that makes this slate is obviously a very unique one. There's only 4 teams. And honestly, that's putting it generously because Southern Utah and New Mexico State are both equally horrendous. I think it's a much better betting slate than anything else. We both have UTEP at pretty good numbers inside 10. I think you want to find inside 10. 9.5 is fine. Anything better than that is a go. You got me onto San Jose State. It's north of 24 now. It was at 23.5 for a while. It's up to 25 in some spots. It does seem like they absolutely decimate this Southern Utah team.
This opened at 22.5. I don't understand that line whatsoever. Southern Utah went 1-5 in FCS play. Again, so I dug into them as a team. They're really pass heavy, 60% pass rate, very fast team. Again, they're similar to like a UConn where they try to play fast, but they're mainly limited by not being able to sustain drives. So their play rate was still above average. Against San Jose State, that type of game plan is going to be really difficult. San Jose State is probably the best defensive line in the Mountain West. They have the returning defensive player of the year in that conference on the D line, another first team on the edge. So, I mean, I think this dude's going to get eaten alive out there, and he doesn't have any rushing upside. As far as the game overall, like San Jose State won the Mountain West Conference last year. They're returning almost all their starters. They lose 2 premier receivers, but a team that is favored by this much, do they even really need to lean on their pass game in this situation to handle Southern Utah? It's an easy bet for me. I still like it at 25. If you can get it there, I would. I have it at 24.5. I don't see this taking anything but money on San Jose State's side.
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, we've talked about this during the week on our shows, and you can catch all our betting breakdowns and our video days over on the Awesemo Odds channel. If you haven't gone over there and subscribed, what are you waiting for? The time is now. We got a lot of great content, the whole team doing fantastic work. I just don't understand. Southern Utah isn't some FCS juggernaut that's taking a step up and testing them against a good San Jose State team. They're just awful in FCS. So I don't know why it would be any different when they're playing a very, very solid team here that knows what they're doing and returns a ton. You mentioned Cade Hall. They got both sides of the line are going to just absolutely dominate. Last thing I want to do here for the night slate, and then we'll take a couple questions and we will bounce on out of here, but stay tuned. NASCAR next. Jason Floyd, Phil B breaking you down at the track. Is there just a couple of pillars for this night slate that you think basically kind of have to be almost locked into those lineups?
Yeah, I think Starkel's a really strong play. And I do think the running backs on that side of the ball are going to be very, very strong plays too. So Kyrie Robinson, Tyler Nevins, 2 very different backs. Basically, like you have one back who's like, they're both going to play a ton. But for this San Jose State team, what they've done in the past, I mean, so Nevins is kind of like the hyper efficient guy, 7.8 yards per carry. Robinson is more of like your bigger back, your plotting back, but both are going to be active. And I think the goal line back is going to be Nevins. Your pass catching back is going to be more Kyrie Robinson. So I think you want to play them both. Isaiah Hamilton's the best returning receiver that this San Jose State team has. And again, you want to be looking at them. Those would be the 3 guys I would look at outside of Starkel. On the UTEP side, Quadres Wadley is extremely cheap at 3,300. Again, we want to take stabs on UTEP players because we expect them to handle New Mexico State, who they allowed nearly 300 yards rushing per game last time we saw them. 279.5 rushing yards per game. It's what their opponents racked up against them. Last year, Quadres Wadley opted out after 1 game, but he was the starter prior to missing most of the season. Deion Hankins is with the team. He's $7K, but this is going to be a 50-50 timeshare between Hankins and Quadres Wadley. Wadley at 3,300, I think, is the best value play on the entire night slate.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say it enough. New Mexico State really struggled against competition that isn't even remotely similar to even UTEP. UTEP's not a great team, but they're a hell of a lot better than Tarleton State and Dixie State. I can confirm that. All right, so we've done that. If anything comes up, certainly you can get updates in our premium Slack. You can follow Matt on Twitter, me on Twitter, Matt_Gajeski, Jazzraz DFS. We'll have you guys covered there. We had a couple questions from chat. All right, you ready? Isaiah Williams, Toure, or Ross for DK cash? Which of those receivers do you think you would lean to in a cash setting?
I would go with Ross.
With Ross? So even though, Illinois' receivers are thin, we're still kind of banking just the way they run the ball and the way they want to play. The methodical nature is still going to be kind of an issue?
That's where I would lean, yes.
Okay. I'm with you. All right, chat. If you have any questions, drop them in now, but we're only going to take them if we pump over 100 likes. We have a ton of people in here. That's going to be easy game. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be doing this each and every week, and it's not just for the Saturday slates, Wednesdays, Thursday. I don't care what day. If there are slates, Matt is going to be on. I'll be on. We'll have you covered. I know there's a lot of awkward schedules at the beginning of the season, but you know what? We've got that there. Raphael says, who do we put in Superflex? So obviously it's lineup dependent. We both think, though, you got to put a QB in the 3-game slate, correct?
Yes.
I think so. On this slate, I want to ask you a little. I know ownership is something that's a little tough with football, but now we have it and we gauge it. How cognizant are you on a 3-game slate, or do you just say, these guys from Fresno, I don't even care if they're 75%. I have to get some of that team exposure-wise?
I definitely care about the ownership, but it's more of a situation where I'm just going to go over the field. So like Ronnie Rivers, we didn't talk about him from a DFS perspective. I don't really think there's a lot to say. You just load up on Ronnie Rivers. I have him close to 100% across formats, certainly in my cash lineup. And I think that's one way you can still think about ownership and then take a stand on it. And a player like Ronnie Rivers is just somebody that I don't want to leave out of my lineups tonight.
Favorite early morning bet? They're in Vegas, so it is actually morning. But of these 3 games, what is your favorite bet?
It is going to be Illinois. For the early game, or if we're considering all 3 early games?
Yeah, all 3 early games. UTEP is my favorite bet, but they don't count in this situation.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be Illinois.
I think mine might be Fresno State at this point. I'm starting to get into the theme that they absolutely just murder them. I just can't with UConn. I'm fascinated by that game. Interesting question. How does the edge in CFB DFS compare to other small DFS sports? To me, it's still there just because you got to dig for the news. Can you elaborate kind of on that?
Yeah, that's 100% it. News still is a huge advantage in these contests. And from there, you have a lot of late news. So there's a big edge in just like being at your computer and being able to react to them. So those are the 2 things I would say create the biggest edges.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Right now, it's a little quiet because, again, we don't have a ton of news. We got the high tower, but some weeks it's just going to be a mad scramble before lock, and we're going to have to react. And then there's going to be things we can't predict. You know, you talked about on our Thursday show, random guy sitting on the sideline, not playing, and we get no word. It's going to be very, very frustrating, but certainly the edge is huge. As Kay points out, if we got ownership, and we have ownership, and it's completely free today. So there's no reason not to get over there. If you are interested in joining, we have packages. We're obviously going to have content each and every week the entire year. I cannot wait. All right. Last question from me. When you look at this slate in the 3-gamer, is there one game that you think kind of defines it? Is it getting Hawaii and UCLA right? Is it the run back with UConn? What do you really see with the theme of this slate?
I think it's not just one game. It's going to be how you attack the huge favorites. So how you attack Fresno State and how you attack UCLA. Those are the 2 games. So I think there's a couple ways you can certainly do it. My favorite, is to just stack up those sides of the ball. But in tournaments, you could look at game stacking, so trying to get the other side. And I think it's a situation where you want to try to predict the optimal game script, especially on a 3-game slate. We talked about one example where you might use 2 UCLA running backs. In that situation, you're probably also not going to use Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So those are things I'm looking at today, and those are things I'm building into lineups. And I would try to keep that in the front of your mind when you're building tournament lineups, because you also need to be different. So those are a couple ways you can do it. I think you can do that with, a lot of teams on this slate.
I love it. Well said. All right, folks, we're out of here. Good luck. Stay tuned for NASCAR next. Good luck in the CFB streets. We'll see you guys next week.